The Pacific Ocean is bigger than we can even imagine. If you were to tunnel straight through it from the coast of Chile, you'd still end up in the Pacific Ocean on the other side. In the videos about our birth dates, we see that there are a total of 5 options in the world, and the biggest one is called the Pacific Ocean, covering an area of 165 million square kilometers. You might be surprised to learn that the total amount of land in our world is just 148 million square kilometers. The Pacific Ocean covers 1 million square kilometers, which means that if we forget about the other 4 options and just focus on it, the Pacific is way bigger than all the mountains, deserts, forests, and even Ireland put together. In this whole scenario, there are just a few islands, and they're so small that compared to the vast ocean, they look like mere dots. To top it off, a lot of these places have never been set foot on by humans. So, in a nutshell, if someone were to get lost in the Pacific, they'd be in a pretty vast and untouched part of the world. So, the chances of finding him are almost zero. But today, you're going to hear the real story of a guy who got lost on his tiny boat for way longer than just 10 or 15 days. He was out there for a staggering 438 days. Yeah, this dude accidentally set a world record that nobody would probably want to break willingly. It's the record for spending the most time alone at sea. And it was achieved by a guy who spent all those 438 days on just a 6-foot boat. But the question is, how did he manage to do that? For months, how did he survive all alone in the ocean? But first, we need to know why he went out there in the first place. It was 12 o'clock when a 36-year-old guy named Josh, who lived in a small village in Mexico called Costa del Sol and was also an expert fisherman, set out for a fishing trip with a buddy. On November 17, 2012, their plan was to spend just 30 hours at sea, which is why they didn't bring too much gear on their small boat. There was just an unknown guy and a refrigerator where he kept the fish, taking only a day's worth of food and drink with him. Little did he know that the next 438 days would be the worst of his life. He went 120 kilometers off the coast of Mexico and set his net in the water when suddenly a fierce sea storm hit. To save himself, he left the fishing net behind and sprinted back to shore. For a whole 6 hours, he was battling through the waves, and by morning, he was only 20 feet from the shore. They were around a kilometer away, and they could actually see their village. They had left the storm pretty far behind, but now luck had completely turned its back on them. Just 20 kilometers from the shore, their boat's engine broke down. They had no oars and no way to steer the boat. The only thing they had was a radio, so they sent their location to their boss and waited for a response. But what happened next felt like a cruel joke. While waiting for their boss's reply, the radio battery died too. They had gone, and now the connection between these 2 mosquitoes and the outside world had completely ended. The shoulder of one and its buddy were still caught up in their little game when suddenly something happened that they had no clue about. The strong winds began pushing them back toward the sea, and the shore they could see was slowly drifting away from them. Their boss even organized a search party and tried to find them with money, but it was already too late. As the days passed, it was becoming increasingly difficult to think of any chance of survival for him and his buddy. It had been 5 days since this accident. They had drifted far away, and the winds had pushed their boat 450 kilometers from the shore. They had reached a point in the ocean where all they could see in every direction was just water. They knew their boat was too small to get support from afar, and they had no way to signal for help with smoke or anything. At that moment, it was clear to them that their chances of survival were less than 1%. The food and water they had brought along had already run out, so now they were just trying to figure out how to fill their stomachs. So, they started catching the birds that would come and sit on their boats, and even began snatching up the fish nearby. Drinking the salty water from the sea could kill a person, so they began collecting rainwater in plastic bottles floating in the ocean to drink. But when it didn't rain for days, they had to quench their thirst by trying to catch fish and tiles too. And that was only if they were lucky enough to catch anything. Days turned into months, and then they were going through mental torture, and it's hard to even imagine what that was like. In the end, Shiloh Ringa's companion couldn't bear it anymore, and he committed suicide on May 4th. He was alone, with no one to talk to about this on that little board, and he started spending his life in the vastness of this sea. From what I gather, this specific area is known to be one of the quietest parts of the world, and cargo ships pass by here occasionally, having left the shores of Mexico 6 months ago. He had been through a lot, and during this time, Jones had lost his partner, which made him really frustrated. One day, he spotted a cargo ship sailing far out at sea. It was the first ship he had seen in 6 months, and just seeing it reignited his hope for survival. He waved his arms and tried to get the ship's attention, but unfortunately, the crew didn't see his little boat. Just like that, his hopes of surviving were dashed again. Imagine being stuck in the middle of the ocean, facing death one day at a time. After fighting for survival, when you finally find a chance to save yourself, only to have it ignored, how would that feel? After 11 months, Jones had traveled 8,000 kilometers on his tiny raft. His clothes were torn, and he had just one tattered shirt left to protect him from the sun. Finally, the moment came when luck was on his side. In January 2014, after a full 14 months, Jones saw coconuts floating in the water around him. He realized that land was nearby, where coconuts were falling from trees into the sea. After a short while, he was indeed on an island and got worried that it might not be the same island. So, he jumped into the water and made his way to the island. It was the first time in 14 months that he had set foot on solid ground. When he arrived in Ireland, he spotted a small house where some locals were present. In the past 438 days, it was the first time he had any contact with another person. This island was a remote one, in the Marshall Islands called Ebon Atoll, which is about 8,000 kilometers away from his starting point. You know, it was just his luck that he ended up in the sea, close to a small part of Ireland. Otherwise, if things had gone differently, he might have been based in Ireland, and the next gig would have been in the Philippines, which is like 5,000 kilometers away from there. When he finally got back home, another problem hit him. Yep, right after he got back, Jones published a book called 438 Countries. But then he got sued for allegedly killing his buddy. That same guy had committed suicide earlier. Thank you so much for your lovely comments. See you in the next awesome video.